Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's virtual event, the SQE 1 Year On with the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the SRA, and BPP University Law School. So I'm Sam, and I'm one of our Head of Student Engagement here at Legal Cheek. And it's great to see so many of you joining us this afternoon. We've had loads of applications, nearly 600 applications in total, so great to see so many of you here. This is our latest in an event series that we've been running in partnership with BPP, exploring all things SQE. So if you've missed any of these sessions, you can access the full recordings on our SQE Hub, which is on Legal Cheek, alongside SQE-related editorial and an FAQs page there too. So a member of the Legal Cheek team will pop a link to that page in the chat now, so you'll have that handy after the event to take a look at if you wish. For today, I'll be handing over very shortly to our panel, but just to cover off some of the basics. The panel discussion, which is going to reflect on the SQE following its introduction a year ago, will run through until 5 p.m. here on the stage. After which there will be some virtual networking where you can ask some follow-up questions to some of the speakers for anything you might have and just discuss anything SQE related there. But I'll be back up at the end and touch on more about that at the end of the panel discussion. So for now, make sure those of you in the audience have your chat in the right-hand sidebar set to stage, where you can pop your questions and all your comments for the speakers over the course of the next hour. And I'd now like to welcome to the stage Johnny Hurst, who is BPP's Head of Outreach and Student Recruitment, and also today's chair. Hi, Johnny.
Hi, Sam. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, how are you today, Johnny?
Yeah, really well. I'm doing this session from BPP's centre in Birmingham, actually. I'm normally based in London, but I've been in Birmingham today seeing some students here.
Great. Well, looking forward to it. So I thought just to kick things off, really, you could just contextualise things and tell us a bit about what the SQE is.
Absolutely right. And just when we run these events, and we've run several of these with Legal Cheek so far, what we've noticed is that there's quite a wide range of understanding of the SQE from people who've been getting their heads around the SQE for some time in the audience, but also people who are coming to these sessions with relatively little knowledge. So apologies in advance if some things are explained which you know already, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of information that will be conveyed today that will be very helpful and new to most people on the call. So what is the SQE? Well, it is the new pathway to qualification as a solicitor. It is replacing the long established legal practice course, which will have a few more years to run, and they're running in parallel together over a transitional period before the SQE permanently replaces it. We'll hear a bit more detail in terms of what the assessments look like, but essentially this new pathway to qualification consists of once you've got a degree, which doesn't have to be a law degree, you have to pass SQE1 and SQE2, which we'll look at in more detail in a moment, and subject to a satisfactory character and suitability test being achieved, you will then hopefully on application to the SRI be admitted as a solicitor. So that is very much an overview of the pathway. I'm sure that our guests from the SRA, who I'm delighted have agreed to be with us today, will give us a lot more detail. And I do encourage people to put questions in the chat, as you said, Sam, but maybe just hold back, because I'll give you an idea of what we're going to cover. We're going to just take some initial overviews from Carol and Richard from the SRA in a moment as to how it's gone over the year, and then we're going to look in detail at what's been happening with SQE1, what's been happening with SQE2, so the two assessments, but also the qualifying work experience part, this 2 years qualifying work experience that you have to complete over and above SQE1 and SQE2 in order to qualify. And then we'll have some final reflections in terms of what's likely to be happening in the near future, any sort of learnings that the SRA have had with regard to the first year. No system is without teething troubles, whether it's this or any other new regime. And personally, I think it's gone very well in the first year. But it'd be interesting to know what changes, if any, the SRA are looking at the end. So, without further ado, Sam, shall we invite Carol and Richard onto the stage?
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So Carol and Richard, and I'll drop off and hand it straight over to you, Johnny.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. And once again, Richard and Carol, thank you so much for joining us today. Perhaps I could just start with asking each of you just to introduce yourselves in terms of your own background and why you're here today representing the SRA. But I could start with Carol.
Oh, hello. I'm Carol Cook, and I'm a policy manager at the SRA. And one of my main functions is the sort of quality assurance oversight of the SQE. In a former life, I qualified as a solicitor uh, in the last century. And I also spent 20 odd years teaching on LLBs and LPCs and GDLs in higher education.
Perfect. Thanks. And Richard.
Hi there, I'm Richard. I'm also a policy manager here at the SRA. I've got responsibility for qualifying work experience and our approach to publishing data around the SQE, and hopefully we can touch on that Johnny. My legal background is nowhere near as distinguished as Carol's. I'm just a pure policy person. Have been for as long as I can remember, working in the public, private, and voluntary sectors.
Thanks so much. And just a bit of context on me, as well as being a lecturer at BPP for many years in a former life, I was practicing as well, like Carol. Commercial law, commercial property law was my bag. Ended up being a partner in a city firm, but most of that was last century, as we said, Carol. So let's kick off, if we could do, with just a bit of an overview, Carol and Richard, and in terms of, well, how's it gone? It's been 12 months since the SQE started. We've had a few iterations of assessments. I think 2 SQE1 assessments and 1 SQE2. What are your initial reflections on the year? How's it gone so far?
I mean, I can pick that one up, Johnny. I mean, you're right. It's 12 months. I think those 12 months have flown by for us. Perhaps less so for those taking the assessments, perhaps, but certainly for us. I think the first point is that actually it's good to recognise how much of a change the SQE is. It's a fundamental change. I think it's the biggest change in how you qualify as a solicitor for perhaps 30 years. So, you know, we're talking fundamental changes for candidates, for law firms, and even for the SRA themselves. You know, and against that backdrop, I think it's fair to say we're really pleased with how the SQE has been implemented so far. As you've mentioned, we've had SQE1, I think it was over 1,000 candidates sat the first SQE. 27 of those were solicitor apprentices, you know, and that people were taking the assessments, you know, in over 100 test centres all around the world. So this is, you know, it's not just we're delivering this on a national scale, it's on an international scale as well. So you can get a sense of the scale of how big the SQE is. And obviously, you know, over 700 individuals took the recent SQE2 as well, and that was across 25 countries. So I think, you know, kind of operationally it's going well. I think the other point which I think we think has gone well is actually how the education training market is responding to the SQE. And I think there was some concern when it was introduced that, you know, that there wouldn't be education training to enable individuals to take the assessment. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. You know, I think lots of education training providers have responded really positively and proactively to the introduction of the SQE. And we're seeing a whole range of provision, SQE1 prep, SQE2 prep. And I think importantly as well, that preparation and the cost of those courses is at a number of price points as well. So, you know, obviously one of the reasons for the introduction of the SQE was to remove some of those kind of cost barriers, and actually, you know, the provision that's out there is more affordable as well. So that can only be a real bonus.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there have been a couple of questions that came in advance in terms of affordability. One question, I think it's question number 2, if we could, Jamina, just put that up on the screen. Are there any payment plans for the SQE exam itself, or does everyone have to make an upfront payment?
We're not aware of any payment plans for the exam itself. However, we are aware that there are payment plans for SQE 1 and SQE 2 prep out there. Now, it might be worth in people who are on this webinar looking at guidance that we've issued on how you can fund your SQE 1 and 2 prep. Now, as part of that guidance, we look at the types of organisations that might well offer kind of monthly payment options, which may or may not include the payment for the assessment itself. So there's a whole range of ways in which people can fund essentially the SQE prep and the assessment.
Yeah, I think I think any new system has to bed itself down, and I think going forward there may well be abilities to, and funds have made available, but they're not currently yet in place specifically for the payment for the exam fees themselves, which are separate to the courses that people will be paying for, and that's a very different regime to the LPC. But as you said, Richard, some courses are much cheaper, but there's a whole range of courses out there. Yeah. Great. Any other reflections in terms of the year, in terms of how it's gone generally? Maybe bring Carol on here. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think the fact that we've been able to offer it across so many centres, both in the UK, but across the world, actually, makes this a sort of globally recognised qualification. So the what's the word I'm looking for? The brand. It's not quite the word I'm looking for, but the quality, the gold standard of the solicitor qualification is sort of recognised is across the world.
Sure, excellent. There was one other question that was generally on this, or the accessibility point. If we could just raise that one. It came from Nancy at Birmingham University, question number 3. And I think you're quite right in saying that financially there are a range of options out there that makes it much more affordable in one sense to take the course. Has the SQE, do you think, made it more accessible to the legal profession in your view now, or are we still waiting to see how things go about?
I think it's far too early to make any judgment at the moment. Now, the initial indications are that there are more training options, more affordable training options available. The introduction of qualifying work experience removes that kind of the barrier of obtaining a training contract, which makes it more accessible. Where you can get your qualifying work experience moves it away from being just within a regulated firm. So there are signs, and the SQE has in place this mechanism to make it more accessible. But we're literally not quite 12 months in. We will have a very comprehensive evaluation in place, which will measure whether or not the SQE has made access to the profession more accessible.
Yeah, because it was certainly one of the central aims, I think, of the reform of the LPC, and there was that bottleneck that was very well commented on in terms of people with LPCs that found it difficult to get training contract. And certainly one of the great innovations is qualifying work experience. If you can get yourself through the SQE, you should be able to qualify, whereas it wasn't the case previously under the LPC with this limited supply of training contracts. Well, let's move on, if we could do, and look at SQE 1 itself. So this is the first of the assessments. I think possibly what we ought to do, because there are a number of students here who are coming across this information for the first time. Can you briefly explain what SQE 1 is, how candidates are assessed, and what they're assessed on, please?
Yeah, sure. I'll pick this one up, Johnny. So the purpose of SQE 1 is we want candidates, we want those people who want to be a solicitor to tell us what they know about core areas of law and to demonstrate that they can apply them in relation to the sorts of transactions and scenarios that they may face commonly in practice. So it's very much a focus on using the law and applying it. So for those who are doing a law degree, they will recognise some of these core areas as being studied on, for example, tort and contract, land law, constitutional law, but it also includes some of the more practice areas, like, for example, criminal litigation and dispute resolution. So criminal law, for example, might be more concerned with what the law says is a crime and what the law says about how to understand whether a crime is committed, whereas criminal litigation would be how to prosecute or how to defend a criminal charge through the courts. It's assessed by way of multiple choice tests, so it's an online test. And there are two parts to it. There's FLK1 and FLK2. I won't go into the detail, but what I will do is sort of post the link to the assessment specification onto the site. But there are 180 questions in part 1, FLK1, and 180 questions in FLK2. And the task is to choose the best option from 5.
Excellent, and I think I did the calculation. It's something like 1 minute 42 seconds per MCQ.
It's just short of 2 minutes. But the paper, obviously, that doesn't mean to say that every question has 20 lines in it and 420 words. There's the balance of paper. Some will be slightly longer than others. Some will have a calculation, maybe a brief tax calculation in it. Some won't have any calculations. So you take into account the sort of whole balance of the paper. Now, on the website, there are some sample multiple choice questions. So anyone, I would urge everyone to have a go. Have a go, Johnny, if you haven't already.
I have, and I surprised
how
myself.
well did you do?
I surprised myself in some areas, but realised that actually this is quite a robust, rigorous exam, and I would need a prep course to get through it if I was going to do it again.
Yeah, because I think it's important to understand that what's being tested is, if you like, the what and the why. What is the law? What is the what's the offence that your client has committed, and why have they committed that offence in relation to the specific areas of law. Now, there has been, some of your students may have sort of picked up that there's been some conversations about, well, we don't think the sample question, we think the sample questions are easier than the questions on the actual paper. And I just want to say to you, the sample questions on the website would be in the assessment paper if they hadn't been published. So they have been drafted to exactly the same standards as the paper, as the questions which appear on the paper. So they're a very good indicator of standard and style and breadth and depth.
Yeah, and I think having been an experienced tutor now for a number of years, questions are only easy if you know the answer, and therefore there will be some questions that you will find easy and other people won't, and vice versa. So I think it's very it's probably a little bit unfair to sort of say that there's a differential in the standard. They're only easy if you know the answer.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of the if we could show question 5 now, which is I think that on the subject of the pass rates, that'd be helpful, because the first set of results were published in November, and there was I think a 53% pass rate overall. And the question that's come in here from Gemma in Cambridge has said, is the pass percentage for the SQE fixed, or is it based on a pass mark? It's a bit more complicated than that, isn't it?
Yes, it is a bit more complicated. The pass mark is set according to the difficulty of the paper, if that makes sense. So what happens is that an ANGOF, for SQE1, there's something that's called an ANGOF panel. Now, that ANGOF panel will comprise some tutors, some newly qualified solicitors, And they will take a judgment on every single question as to how many sort of just passing candidates out of 10 would get this right. So if they said, well, 2, that's a pretty tough question. If they say 9, then that's a pretty easy question. Yeah. If they say 6, then it's sort of, it's about the right standard, hard, if you like. So what happens is all of those marks are averaged out to produce a pass mark, if you like, for that particular assessment. So that's why the pass mark will change over time, because it's assessed according to the difficulty of the paper.
And it was, I think, 53% for the SQE1 assessments that were first set overall, wasn't it?
That was that the pass mark or the pass rate?
Sorry, the pass rate. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yes,
and
so the pass rate
mark
is
for the 2 papers was a little bit higher than that, wasn't it? Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, the more candidates passed FLK1 than passed FLK2, and we looked at that and we looked at it very carefully. And there are a couple of observations we can make rather than knowing scientifically exactly what might have given rise to that. Certainly, if you look at the pass marks for the same paper, they're about the same. So the standard was set for both in exactly the same way. But there are more procedural subject areas on FLK2 than there are on FLK1. So that might have felt that it was more complex for some candidates who haven't had very much in the way of practical procedural experience or training. And it's also possible, just, human nature, that they were just a bit more tired and had a bit less time to prepare for FLK2 than they did for FLK1, that they'd put all their efforts into FLK1 and it left them a bit weary for FLK2. Obviously, we'll continue to keep it under, we want to understand how candidates are experiencing the assessment, and we're always keen to interrogate the statistical data we get to try and identify emerging themes. But that's where we sort of landed with this, really, that principally we think the fact that there were more practice-based subject areas in FLK2 might have been what caused that differential.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's probably likely to be some truth in the fact that students were probably just slightly better prepared for the first paper because it was the first one that came along, and hoped to make up the rest of the revision in the intervening time. But certainly from my own assessment history, I know that doesn't always happen just because you're tired and maybe you have unrealistic expectations about how much you can achieve in the intervening time. That's been very helpful on that, Carol. Thank you. Just sticking with the SQE1 assessment. So we've got this pass rate of 53% just for the first sit. Do you expect it to, what sort of parameters do you expect it to be between going forward? I know it's $1 million question, but I don't expect it's going to be 75% pass rate unless you tell me otherwise, and I doubt that we'll get below 40%, but I don't know, you tell me.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, Johnny, provided everything we do in terms of setting the standard, preparing the questions to ensure that they are valid, that we're assessing the things we should assess, that they're reliable, that the same result would be produced over, different cohorts, then in a way, a pass rate of 0 or 100 is in a sense defensible. Clearly, we would not, we certainly wouldn't want a pass rate of 0, and we wouldn't expect a pass rate of 100. But I think our position is the pass rate, because of all all the steps we take to ensure those high levels of validity and reliability and realism and fairness, that the pass rate, that we accept the pass rate as it falls, really. We expect it will move up and down a wee bit over time, because that will depend on the cohort. It will depend on, we had, for example, I think, we might have had a larger number of qualified lawyers than in this cohort than we might have in future cohorts. Difficult to understand because we don't know how the global market will go. So it'll change, but the important thing is that candidates have confidence that even though the pass rate might change, the standard that we're assessing at does not change over time. That's where our focus is.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognise that it was a very untypical cohort for cohorts going forward who sat first time. Richard, who were the typical sitters? It wasn't your necessarily your the profile of a 22-year-old law graduate who sat, although one or two I'm sure did, but who were the people who sat the first iteration, which might explain why there might be a differential going forward?
I mean, you're right. I mean, our view was that it wasn't an atypical cohort. I think it was predominantly filled with perhaps a high number of paralegals and people that might have already had sort of legal experience that you would get in the case that you've said, Johnny, where you've got someone coming out of university doing perhaps qualifying work experience and doing the SQE. And I suspect as well there's probably quite a few qualified lawyers in that original cohort as well.
Yeah, and the apprentices as well.
And the apprentices, which we mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, so there's quite a wide range of students, and I think, as we go on year, there'll be many more of the sort of typical profile of the bulk of the students who historically took the LPC, which look like the sort of 22 to 23-year-old university leaver, as well as the rest of the typical LPC cohort, which that first iteration wasn't. Just before we leave the SQE1, if we could just explain how the booking window works, because and maybe talk about the fees. There has been a question that's come in terms of why are the fees for resits the same as the original sit. I mean, I suppose there's a cost involved there, but I'll let you answer that. But can you explain how the booking window first works and the cancellation policy? Because I think it's important that students understand how it works, because there is a window when they can cancel without too much of a financial penalty, but beyond a certain point, because I think the SRA commits resources, there's a much more draconian, if I may say, consequence of cancelling late in the day.
Yeah, I can pick that up. I mean, again, I'm just going to keep this really high level because the detail is on the web, but essentially there are two stages. The first stage is to register, so every candidate has to register, but they only do that once, and registration gives them an account and then access to the sort of booking window, really. So the dates that the assessments are available and the dates that the booking windows open and close are on the website, and there's usually quite a long booking window, but obviously the later you book, the less available the centres become. So once you're ready to book for the particular assessment, the web only allows you to book the assessment you're eligible to book, if you like. So if you haven't done SQE1, you can't book SQE2. And the first thing you would do is you'd go onto the Pearson VUE sites to check what centres are available for you to book for SQE1. And if you're booking for SQE2, the centres where the written assessments are available, because the written assessments for SQE2, and I know we'll come on to that later, operate out of the same centres that the that SQE1 does, but the oral assessments for SQE2 are in different centres. So you make your booking. It's possible to do FLK1 in one centre and FLK2 in a different centre, if that's more convenient for you. And of course, it always depends on availability. There aren't unlimited seats available in each centre, but we try and make available the maximum number of seats, according to where the biggest demand is. One thing to be clear about, that if you want to sit in London, there'll be lots of different centres for London, so choose your centre. There's not just one central London centre.
So you might sit in two different centres if, for example, one centre, if you're talking cycle and one centre is booked up. But
yeah,
there
you
will be
might
other
do, or just that you might find that it's actually easier for you to be in one place for FLK1 and another place for FLK2. So it is possible to split those up. Same for SQE2. Actually, you can sit each day in a different centre if
Sure.
you wanted to. So that's booking. There's not, and you are required to pay at the time you book. In terms of cancellation, so this is all set out in the terms and conditions. So when a candidate books, they are entering into a contractual obligation with the SRA, and obviously the SRA is also entering into a series of contractual obligations to the candidate. But the cancellation policy is set within the terms and conditions. Again, the detail is in there, but if you like, in short, if you cancel within 14 days of booking and paying, there will be no cancellation charge. After that, certain fees start to be payable. And if you book, I think if you try to cancel within 48 hours, then the fee is forfeited in whole.
That's 48 hours of the assessment.
Of the
yeah,
assessment,
48
that's
hours
right,
report.
yeah. However, if, for example, you can't attend because you become ill, then there is a provision to be able to seek a medical refund, provided there is evidence available to support the fact that you were unable to attend because you were ill. So there are some provisions in place which try to, if you like, ameliorate that cancellation policy and the where the whole fee isn't refunded where events occur outside a candidate's control. Again, I'll put the relevant link into the chat so you can see it. But what I would also say, and I'm not saying that they are going to change, but these are terms and conditions, and sometimes terms and conditions change. So what I'm saying now applies for the moment, yeah. But any candidate booking should always read the terms and conditions that are going to apply to their booking at the time.
Yeah, and just for the purpose of the recording, today's the 16th of August 2022. So if you're watching this a little later than that, yeah, the place to go is to check the SRA's website and the T's and C's that appear. Is it on your website, the T's and C's, or is it on?
Yeah, they are.
Website?
Well, we have an SQE website, which is, so it's, again, I'll put the link in. If you come onto the SRA's website, you won't get all the information you need, and you won't be able to book via the SRA's website. But we do have a dedicated SQE website, which I'll put a link in, and that's got everything. That's where the booking information is, the terms and conditions, the assessment specifications, the sample questions. That's the first port of call for everybody.
Good. Let's move on to SQE2 because time is moving on. So we passed SQE1, and as you've said, Carol, we have to have completed SQE1 before we can take before we can apply to register for SQE2, unless one of the LPC exceptions applies, which we'll cover off in a moment. So how are candidates assessed on SQE2, and what are they assessed on? Is that you, or is that Richard who's going to take that?
Sorry, it's me again. So SQE2, it's an assessment of competence essentially, and that's assessed through the legal skills of legal writing, legal drafting, legal research, advocacy, and case and matter analysis. In the context of property practice, probate practice, business, dispute resolution, and criminal litigation. So they align with the practice rights that an individual gets once they're admitted as a solicitor.
Okay, and so they have to bring forward the black letter law that they've been tested on in SQE1 because they're assessed in that context. So I think all the more reason to make sure that you do a really good preparation course for that. And they're assessed, is it partly online and partly in person for these SQE2 assessments?
Yeah, so there are 16 individual assessment tasks, but SQE2 is one assessment, if you like, but it's made up of 16 individual tasks. 12 of them are written, so they're done online at a Pearson View Centre. And then the oral assessment, so advocacy and interviewing, currently they're done in Manchester, Cardiff, and 2 centres in London, and they're done in person.
Okay, any plans to extend the cities for SQE2 where it's going to be offered? Because that might be quite a trip for people that might involve overnight accommodation, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we're sort of meeting demand. I mean, we'll be demand led or demand driven. I'm not sure which way round that is, but yeah, we're monitoring demand all the time. So we'll bring on, extra venues and places where they might be. Will be driven by what we think the demand is.
And SQE2 results, we haven't had any yet. When they like to be published?
Oh, I think I'm going to hand over to Richard on this.
We're on mute, Richard.
Apologies. It had to happen to someone, so it might as well have been me. So yeah, in terms of the SQE2 results, they will be released on the 25th of August. So not long to wait now if you sat the assessment, and they will be released after 11 a.m. UK time. Candidates will be sent an email notifying them of when the results are available and what to do next. So you'll get an email.
Yeah, so it'd be really interesting to know. And is there anything you can share on a general nature without giving the game away at this stage?
I don't think there is at this stage, Johnny. It's a probing Paxman-like question,
No,
but
it's not.
I think
it's
at
one
this
that I
stage
expected to know.
No,
Okay.
there's not at this stage, Johnny. I think the only thing we can say is that obviously after each, as we did with the first SQE1 assessment, we will produce a short report picking up some of the themes that perhaps we've observed from the SQE2 assessment. So there'll be some kind of narrative around that, as well as the external examiner's report, and as well as sort of information from Kaplan as well. So once the results are out, there's an awful lot of material people can really get stuck into to have a look at what's really going on.
Brilliant. And just before we leave the SQ2 assessments, perhaps we could just pop up question number 1 that was raised in advance from a student who I think raised the question without wanting to share their name, which is absolutely fine because it's a very good question. Question number 1, if we could have that up on the screen, please, Jamina. And it's I think a very real question that a lot of students who come from a non-law background are asking. That some students have committed to a law conversion course, whether it's the GDL, a PGDL, or a law foundations course, or something of a similar name. Now, I do know that, and I think it was well publicised, that the SRA is saying students do not need a law degree or conversion course to sit the SQE. What's your advice to a student who's sat their GDL? Have they been wasting their time?
No, not at all. I mean, if a candidate has completed the GDL, then they have two choices really. They can continue to qualify via what we now call the old pathway. So and they are caught within what we call the transitional arrangements. Again, detail on the website. So they could carry on and complete the legal practice course and obtain a period of recognised training. And I think the transitional period is available until December 2032. I think it is. Yeah. With various sort of possibly with various sort of timelines in between, depending on, it might be that they have to start the LPC by 2026, but again, that's detail that's on the website. So they can continue along the route they started, or they can come in and to the SQE route.
But I think
take the SQE route.
And I think the reality, I think what students are very worried about is that they wasted their money, and that's certainly not the case of what law firms are saying. Law firms are saying, certainly the top law firms that send their trainees to BPP are saying, we want our non-law graduates to have a formal GDL law conversion course, PGDL, because they really value that solid foundation in law that gets them to the same level as the law graduates who then embark on an SQE course. And I suppose it's, does the SRA have a slight regret in the message about saying with such loud voice that non-law graduates don't need a conversion course? Because wasn't that giving the wrong message, really, given the way the profession has responded?
No, I don't think we. I mean, what we were saying is we're not deciding what you have to do. We're not defining all your inputs, if you like. What we're saying is you make the decisions according to what you feel you need. Now, we're not saying a non-law graduate has to go on and do the GDL, but we wouldn't imagine that a non-law graduate would attempt SQE1 without having done some sort of training. Now that doesn't have to be the GDL or the CPE. It could be a different sort of course provided by a different sort of provider. It could be self-study. It could be a correspondence course. It could be anything. So what we're doing is we're not saying you don't have to know the law. We're saying you make the decision about what works for you to enable you, to prepare you to sit SQE1 and SQE2.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Let's move on if we can do, because a very important subject that's cropped up in the chat and in advance with the questions, the subject of qualifying work experience. Richard, just in a nutshell, just remind everybody what qualifying work experience is before we maybe go through it in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. I mean, just to reiterate that point I made at the very beginning, that obviously, one of the big problems with qualifying under the previous pathway was people's ability to get a training contract, and that stopped potentially competent individuals from becoming a solicitor. So in part, qualifying work experiences goes to the heart of that accessibility point we talked about earlier and removes that barrier. But in terms of, I suppose, kind of practicalities, there is, I'm going to sound like Carol a little bit now, but there is an awful lot of information on our website about this. Very many webinars featuring me, if you can stand any more of my voice. So I would encourage you to go and have a look at those. But what qualifying work experience is any experience of providing legal services that exposes an individual to some or all of the competencies in the statement of solicitor competence. Now, I just want to unpick that a little bit. So the first question probably is, well, what do you mean by legal services? And we have deliberately not defined what that is. However, if you are looking for, I suppose, a kind of a framework in which to test what you might be doing against, what we're saying is if you go to Section 12 of the Legal Services Act, it defines what legal services activity is within there. So you can take a look at the types of work that you're doing now, and if you broadly fit within, what that definition is saying, then it's likely that the work you're doing meets that kind of criteria of what legal services is. So hopefully that explains or helps people kind of clarify their own circumstances. The other question that we're frequently asked is, well, what do you mean by some or all? And I suppose there's probably two answers to this. There's a kind of, what's the minimum regulatory requirement I need to do in order to satisfy the SRA in order to be admitted? So by some, the minimum number is 2, because it's essentially more than 1. But I don't think that's probably the right way that people should approach it, because actually, whilst that ticks the regulatory box, the question I'll be asking myself is, well, is that giving me the best chance of passing SQE2? Because part of what qualifying work experience is designed to do is socialize people to how solicitors work in practice, the kind of the ethical issues they might face, and some of those kind of skills that Carol mentioned in real life. So, you need to think about what it is you need to meet the regulatory requirement, but also what's going to give you the best opportunity of passing the SQE. Just a couple of other points on that. It's got to be 24 months, but it can be broken down into no more than 4 blocks, so essentially 6 months. And it needs to be confirmed by a solicitor we regulate, but they don't have to have a practicing certificate. It can be attained here or abroad, and I've seen quite a few questions about whether qualifying work experience can be obtained overseas. It can, so long as it meets that definition of providing legal services and signed off by a solicitor. And I think...
Oh, I seem to have lost Richard there for a moment. Carol, I think you're still with us, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. Oh, he's back.
Richard, we lost you for a moment there.
We lost you for a moment.
Sorry, where did I get up to? And I'll go again from there.
The other point to mention is...
Okay. On that cliffhanger, I left you. So apologies for that. The other point to mention is it can be claimed retrospectively. So if you have any kind of previous experience, paralegal experience, or legal experience that meets that definition, then you can also use that as well.
Yeah, and I think undoubtedly that this makes qualifying as a solicitor easier. We got a very good question at 4:46 p.m. on the group chat on the platform, Jamina, from Jasmine Jones. Do you mind if you just put that up there? This is one of the questions that I think we chatted about in preparation for this session. So does the fact that obviously making it easier to get qualified cause a different type of bottleneck with new qualified solicitors? It's a question I know you've been asked many times before. What is the answer to that question? Because some students won't have heard what the response is. It
is a really good question, and I think kind of our starting point is to go back to what we are as a regulator, and our role is to make sure that people that we admit are of the required standard. So that's why we've essentially introduced the SQE, as well as improving accessibility. So, in part the answer is, well, if there's a kind of post-qualification bottleneck, then that, that's not necessarily something for us to be too concerned about, because that's a market issue as opposed to a one of standards. Now, again, these are the types of impacts that it's really too early to understand whether or not they're going to come to fruition. But we will be evaluating whether or not there is a bottleneck created because of the SQE and a range of other impacts as well.
Thanks. And we got quite a few questions about QWE. I think it's probably worthwhile just answering Suki's question on just putting into context, because some people won't be aware of it. Suki's question at 448 in the chat. So this is students who have done the LPC, because they let's maybe there was one other question first of all. That would be one of the main exemptions. Do bar students, people who've done a bar course, have been called to the bar, do they get any exemptions at all, or are they required to sit the whole of the SQE regime first of all?
There's no automatic exemption for candidates who've done the bar course, but it is possible. It's not easy, but theoretically possible to get an exemption from SQE1 if you can demonstrate that you have a qualification and or work experience of the standard and the breadth and depth of the areas of law covered by the FLK.
So we got Suki's question here then, which is
then,
probably aimed at the LPC graduates mainly, I suspect.
think it is, yeah. I mean, the short answer is, in terms of the mechanics of it, I don't really know. All I know that if you fall within those transitional arrangements, then you book in for SQE2, and I think the questions will ask you whether you've taken SQE1, and if not, why not. So
just to be clear, LPC graduates
Mm.
are entitled to go to qualify, provided that they pass SQE2 and then complete 2 years qualifying work experience in lieu of a 2-year training contract. That's right, I think, isn't it?
I think also, but this has a window, that there's a, you know, that there is a window on when this transitional period is available. So again, I'll post the website details, but I don't have the details of this at my fingertips. Sorry.
Thank you. Just to let you know, just for the remainder of the session, if you could post where it says comments and not in private chat, because I think I've had to copy and paste a couple of the links.
Oh, I've done them all in private chat. I do apologise.
I've copied them over. I've copied them over. It'd be worthwhile just for the remainder, the remaining ones.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of time, and I think in the networking session we can certainly talk more about qualifying work experience in more detail. With a few minutes to go, let's just take a look at the future, and I suppose, apart from the ongoing monitoring that you would be doing, Richard, in any sort of new system like we've got here, I assume the SRA will undertake a full review of the introduction of the SQE. In fact, you alluded to that earlier. Are you able to sort of share what that review might look like, and how stakeholders might be involved, and what sort of things are you going to be looking at in terms of themes that maybe lessons have been learned, like anybody would have learned in 1 year into a new system?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Johnny. You know, you're right to point out that, you know, reviewing how the SQE has performed operationally and whether or not it's achieved its intended outcomes of, you know, introducing a robust standardized assessment and increased accessibility. You know, we've got to be looking at that all the time, and we are. You know, around the operational aspect, you know, Carol heads up the team that looks at, you know, how the assessments have been delivered, you know, and whether they are, you know, meeting our criteria, making sure that the quality assurance arrangements are in place. You know, we're learning from what's happened in terms of the SQE1 and SQE2, and making sure that, you know, we build on some of the good practice, but also try and iron out some of the issues that have happened with how they've been delivered. But, you know, all of this is underpinned by a really comprehensive evaluation program. Now, there is a whole host of information on our website about what that evaluation does, what it's focused on, but broadly speaking, it is, you know, has the SQE done what it said it was set out to do? That's available on our website, but there's lots of opportunities for people to get involved. Actually, you know, we'll be releasing or launching later this year an initial perception study of the SQE. So we want to kind of gather people's initial thoughts on what's happened in terms of the SQE, and that covers lots of different things. You know, people's understanding level of understanding right through to their experiences. And we'll also be releasing and launching a 12-month evaluation of what's happened in terms of qualifying work experience, and that will be an annual piece of work that we'll be doing. So there's lots of opportunities for people to kind of input and contribute their thoughts and experiences going forward.
And any specific learnings when things haven't gone quite to plan that you can share with us in terms of what's happened and how things might change going forward?
I mean, I think it's fair to say, that in some sense there've been, in some situations there've been teething issues. That's not uncommon with a national, let alone international licensing examination. Without going into kind of the nuts and bolts of the details, we're aware of some of those issues, and we're putting in place kind of corrective measures to make sure that they don't happen again. And it's a learning process. 12 months into potentially what could be, the next 30, 40 years. So, it is about learning. It's about taking that learning forward and, and making sure that any minor issues are adjusted for, so that, no one's disadvantaged.
Yeah, I mean, there were some quite well publicised technical issues recently, but I was very impressed in the way that the SRA had a very relatively quick answer. It wasn't great for the students concerned, but there was leverage there that the SRA could exercise to take action quite quickly to sort out a problem. So it does sound like you've got contingency plans in place, but obviously for those students that get adversely affected, of course there's nothing you can do for them at the time, is there?
No, and I think that's right, Johnny. And I think just in terms of managing people's expectations, well, and I know I keep saying the same, sounding like a politician, but this is a huge examination, and I think it would be massively disingenuous for us to say every time there's an SQE assessment it's going to run perfectly, because there are things beyond our control. What we have to do is make sure that we put in place measures to give each assessment the best chance that they run smoothly, and take action where something may happen that's way beyond our control.
Great stuff. We've just got a few more minutes to go. So I was just going to take a look at some of the I mean, there are so many questions that come up, and thank you everybody for these questions. And do please join us in the networking session, which Carol will be able to attend for the first few minutes, and I'll certainly be there for the whole hour. So we'll try and get as many of the questions that are outstanding answered, and it's an opportunity for you guys to go on camera and have a dialogue rather than just text in a message. In terms of the questions that have come up, there's lots on qualifying work experience here. But I think probably let me just go back to some of the questions that we've got in terms of some of the advanced questions that we received. There's, I think, question number 4, which came in from Francesca. If we could just put that in, because we often have, and I saw in the chat right at the beginning of the session, lots of students who were calling in from abroad, and I think you mentioned earlier, Richard and Carol, that it would, the SQE is becoming an internationally recognised qualification. So what is the position with regard to international students qualifying and doing the SQE? Can they qualify as a solicitor in England and Wales and do the assessments like they can do under the LPC regime and become solicitors? Is there any difference in that?
Absolutely they can. So if they come to the SQE as a qualified lawyer, they're already qualified in their own jurisdiction, then they will sit SQE1 and SQE2. If they come to SQE with a degree or equivalent, remember, we don't say you have to have a bachelor's degree, we say you have to have a bachelor's degree or equivalent, and we have mechanisms for recognising qualifications that are granted in other countries and other jurisdictions. So it's open to everybody, SQE 1 and SQE 2. So it does open up the route to admission, literally internationally. The current limitation would be for those people who live abroad, is they currently have to come to the UK to complete the oral elements of SQE2. And of course, although we offer SQE1 and SQE2 written in lots of centres across the world, we don't offer it everywhere in every single country across the world because of quarantine arrangements. So there are restrictions that are created by time zones, essentially.
I think the only other point I'd add to what Carol has said is that in terms of qualifying work experience, if you are a qualified lawyer, our requirements around the 2-year period of qualifying work experience don't apply.
That's great. Final question, cheeky one. If you were to mark yourselves out of 10 at the SRA for how well it's gone in the first year, what would you say?
Just waiting for Carol to go first. I'm going to.
I think there's room for improvement. I think, you know, I think that we did. When I'm saying we did the best we could, that sounds like a bit lame, and I don't mean that. But you know, we had lots of plans. This was a long time in the making. We've got lots and lots of information out there to try and ensure that candidates are, you know, have enough, and training providers have the information they need to be prepared for it. There were things that maybe we weren't quite on our radar. So I think we have. The key thing is that our systems and our processes and our focus is sufficiently agile and sensitive to pick up things that we need to do better, and we recognise where that need is. So I think that's so what I would say is, I think I would score us really highly on our radar, if you like, for picking up things that we need to do better and putting those things in place, trying to put those things in place.
I think just adding to Carol's remarks there, I think, you know, we're not going to be resting on our laurels now and thinking that the job is now done. Isn't it all wonderful? The SQE is up and running. Absolutely not. You know, we are focusing very hard on how we can improve it, you know, the assessment and the delivery of the assessment to make sure that it runs more smoothly. And I've mentioned how we can do that. You know, I think the other big aspect is really around how best we support candidates, aspiring solicitors, to make really good choices in line with their circumstances about how they qualify. Now, you know, that doesn't happen at the moment. It doesn't happen under the kind of, you know, the previous qualification pathway. And we've got plans kind of towards the back end of 2023 to make lots of data available for people who want to qualify as a solicitor, help them make choices about which university they go to, which is the best SQE provider, SQE1, SQE2 provider, all sorts of things like that. So, you know, we recognise there is still more that we can do in terms of kind of informing choice around the SQE, particularly in this early stages of its development.
Absolutely, yeah. There's such a range of products out there, a whole range of providers, and it's quite hard for the students to navigate that market. So any stats that would be helpful, I'm sure, to students making decisions further forward. Thank you both so much for sparing your time with us today. I certainly want to pick up on the support for students as we start off the networking, in particular those that are neurodiverse and partially sighted, particularly with SQE1. That was a question that came up in the chat, so we will definitely get that one covered off, Carol. So just to let you know, that's what we'll start off with. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Richard, for your time. I know you're a busy man. Been really helpful and insightful, and lots of appreciation in the chat for for you and Carol there. Just like to invite Sam back now, who will just give us a few instructions as to how the networking session is going to run. And I would encourage you guys to stay on if you can do, because whilst this session is being recorded, the networking session isn't. And we normally get through 100 questions, so there's every possibility your question will be answered.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Johnny. And just to echo what you said, thanks very much, Carol and Richard, too, for joining us today. It's been a really great discussion and plenty of questions answered. But as Johnny's mentioned, plenty to come. The event doesn't end there. So Johnny and Carol, if you'd like to head over to the virtual networking now, you can do that by pressing the return in the bottom of your screen heading to the expo. For those in the audience, don't go anywhere just yet, because I'd like to explain all the next steps to you. So just to say thank you for joining us as well, and seeing so many questions coming through, and now really is your chance to get those answered. So as a quick reminder, firstly, a recording of this session will be made available in a month's time on the Legal Cheek SQE hub. But now you'll need to head to the expo, which is in the left-hand sidebar. You'll be able to see it there. Once in the expo, you'll be able to see the booth. If you click on it to enter, we're encouraging, once you're in there, to share your audio and video, come up on the screen, and then you can network and ask away. And thank you very much all once again for joining us, and I'll see you all over in the networking now.